Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our series of webinars focused on bringing you information about COVID-19 related topics. The information in these weekly webinars is geared towards long-term care and skilled nursing facilities, but we encourage everyone who's interested to attend. My name is Casey Stevens, and I'm a communication specialist with Quality Insights. Today, we'll be discussing the minimum data set, MDS, changes are coming, sections J, K, L, and M. Everyone has entered the meeting on mute, but we will have a discussion following the presentation. If you have questions or comments, please submit them either using the chat or the Q&A tool in your Zoom menu. You can also raise your hand and request to be unmuted to ask the question aloud at the end of the presentation. We invite you to join us every Wednesday at 2 p.m. for more of our weekly webinars. Next week, we'll be discussing the MDS changes and highlight sections N, O, P, and Q. And now I'd like to introduce our guest today, Deborah Wright. Deborah is a quality improvement specialist here with Quality Insights. She joined our team after being in the long-term care industry for more than 30 years. She has a wealth of experience in long-term care in nursing and management, ranging from certified nursing assistant to vice president of healthcare operations. She's most passionate when working with the MDS process and quality improvement. Deb, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm so used to saying thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Casey. All right. So today, like Casey said, we're going to talk about sections J, K, L, and M. So just a recap for those that may be new to these webinar series. These are helpful links as you're preparing for October 1st. Here's the link for the MDS forms and the REI Manual. There's also a link to the CMS official YouTube channel. And on that channel, they have a series of webinar trainings that, or snippets of trainings of different sections of the MDS. So you can just go to their YouTube channel, Google which section you want to look for. Here's just some examples of the MDS sections. There's also a multitude of other trainings that CMS has available on that YouTube channel. Globally, there's changes to the MDS. They've updated the language to be gender neutral. There's minor wording changes for better understanding. They've improved some of the coding examples to improve the clarity. They've changed all of their references from the keys system to the I keys, and they made revisions pertaining to the legal informations for family, significant other, or proxy. There were changes made to the chapter guidance for 1, 2, and 4. We're not going to go over those during these webinar series, but just so you're aware, so you can check those out. And then these are the sections that they either had revised data elements or revised guidance in chapter 3. So picking up where we left off, we're going to start with section J, the health conditions. The intent of this pretty much hasn't changed. It's just talking about the different health conditions that impact the resident's functional status and quality of life. It's where the pain assessment is, as well as a number of other topics such as their shortness of breath, their tobacco use, their conditions, falls, surgeries. The one thing that has changed is the management of pain, and there's different areas that they're now looking at. So in addition to how does pain affect their sleep and their interference with their day-to-day activities, they've added pain interference with therapy, which we'll talk about. So to start off in section J, they just added a couple coding tips. There's not much change at all to section J0100 pain management. The big thing to remember, and I have to remind myself sometimes as well, is that this is a 5-day look back. It's the only section that has that 5-day look back. So did the resident receive scheduled pain medication, PRN medication, and any non-medication intervention for pain? So some revised pain assessment coding tips. Here's the pain interview. And we're going to start off by saying, have you had any pain or hurting in the last 5 days? If they answer no, we're going to skip right ahead to the shortness of breath section. If they answer yes, then we're going to continue with the pain interview. So they were going to still ask, how much time have you experienced pain or hurting over the last 5 days? That question hasn't changed, but what has changed is the coding numbers and our responses. So you can see here that it's been renumbered. So 1 is now rarely or not at all. 2 is occasionally. 3 frequently. 4 almost constantly. And 9 unable to answer. Then we're going to ask, how much of the time has the pain made it hard for you to sleep at night? And again, the answers are the same. The coding was just revised. So instead of a yes or no, like it used to be, does it make it hard for you to sleep at night? Yes or no. We're going to have to dive a little bit deeper and ask the 4 responses that we had up above, the rarely, occasionally, frequently, or almost constantly. We're going to do the same thing with jumping down to J0530, our day-to-day activities. Again, instead of it being a yes or no, we're now asking how much of the time does that interfere with your day-to-day activities. And then the new question that they added was, how often has the pain limited your participation in rehabilitation therapy sessions? So we've added a code of 0 in case the resident is not on therapy. So we would code 0, does not apply. I have not received rehabilitation therapy in the last 5 days. If they have received therapy, then it would be the same codes 1 through 8 that we have up above. And then the pain intensity, the numeric rating scale, or the verbal description, that has not changed at all. That's the same coding. So again, this is just a recap, the pain assessment. We're going to ask them the primary question, have they have pain? If they answer yes, then we're going to do the 6 follow-up questions, their frequency, effect on sleep, interference with therapy activities, interference with day-to-day, and then their pain intensity, either that numeric or verbal description. And then here is just the definitions spelled out a little bit more. They're the same for all 3 sections. So the pain effect on sleep, we would code 1, rarely or not at all. If the resident responds that the pain has rarely or not at all made it hard for them to sleep over the 5 days. Occasionally, same thing, frequently, almost constantly. And then unable to answer, we would code this if the resident is unable to answer the question, or they do not respond, or they give a completely nonsensical response to the question. The same thing is here with your therapy activities, with the exception of coding 0 does not apply because they didn't participate in therapy during the past 5 days. And the same thing with your day-to-day. It's the same definitions. If we have to go to the staff assessment because the resident's unable to answer the primary question on the pain presence in J0300, then we'll skip to the pain assessment or the staff assessment for pain, and then there's no changes to that section. So the same indicators of pain or possible pain have not changed at all from what we're doing now. And then for the rest of section J, there were no coding changes to shortness of breath, tobacco use, prognosis, their problem conditions, their fall history, fall since the last admission or entry or prior assessment, no changes to the prior surgery or surgery requiring sniff care. So then swallowing and nutritional status. The intent hasn't changed here. This section's intended to assess the conditions that affect the resident's ability to maintain their adequate nutrition and hydration. There are no coding changes to swallowing disorder, height and weight loss and gain, or percent by artificial root. The only thing that I will point out, because I do see a lot of facilities miss this, is that the height is supposed to be reassessed annually. So it doesn't mean annual to annual. It can be if you pick a certain month and every month that's when you're going to check the height, then that you can use that as your annual height, but just make sure that that height is being reassessed at least annually. So what has changed in Section K? So the changes, really the questions and the coding have not changed. They've just expanded and added these 2 additional columns. So while we were always looking at parenteral and IV feeding, feeding tubes, mechanically altered diets, and therapeutic diets while not a resident or while a resident, we now also are going to be looking at it on admission and at discharge. And that's defined as on admission days 1 through 3 of the SNF PPS stay. So if they're coming in and we're doing a 5-day MDS, then that admission column is going to be opened up for us to do it. At discharge, if it's an end of a PPS assessment, then the at discharge column will be lit up. Other than that, we will still just be doing the while not a resident or while a resident columns. So here's just the definitions spelled out a little bit. On admission, again, is checking all nutritional approaches performed during the first 3 days of the SNF PPS stay. Column 2, while not a resident, we'll continue to look at that during the 7-day look back or prior to admission or entry or re-entry. This will also be opened up when we're completing an IPA. And then column 3, while a resident, again, we're checking all that apply after admission or entry or re-entry and within the 7-day look back. And if it's an admission MDS, but not a SNF PPS stay MDS, then K520D is not required, which is the therapeutic diet. We wouldn't be looking at that. And then at discharge, we would be coding them if they would check all that apply within the last 3 days of the SNF PPS stay. So again, going back up here, we have on admission, which will be opened up with your 5-day assessments. And then at discharge, this column will be opened up if it's a SNF PPS stay ending. Coding tips that were added, they added only feeding tubes that are used to deliver nutritional substances or hydration during the assessment are coded. And then the one thing that they did clarify is that we should not be coding if a mechanically altered diet is strictly being done during a trial period. So if only speech therapy is trying pureed food, then we would not code that as a mechanically altered diet. I've been trying to come up with examples of when this may be, and the only one that really comes to mind that they wouldn't already be mechanically altered is if they were getting tube feed and speech therapy was working with them to increase their PO intake and they were trialing mechanically altered diets. But other than that, I really couldn't, in my own mind, couldn't come up with examples because they would already be on mechanically altered diet of some sort. So section L, the changes there are none. So we get a little break with no changes to section L. And then section M, we could spend a whole day talking about section M. It is something that all of us probably struggle with, understanding the different terminology that all different nurses use, in having that good assessment during our look back period. So the intent of section M hasn't changed. It's to document the risk, pressure, appearance, change of pressure, ulcers and injuries, to note any kinds of wounds or lesions and the treatments that they're getting for that. CMS also did kind of put a little disclaimer in here that they're aware of all the different terms that many different clinicians may use, or documentation can reflect any of these terms. So while we may call it one thing, and if it doesn't exactly say a pressure ulcer, if the intent is, it is still related to pressure, no matter what the clinician calls it or our documentation calls it, it's still a pressure ulcer. And they give the example of if there's a stage 2 pressure injury, we're still going to code the MDS as a stage 2 pressure ulcer. I guess they just felt the need to clarify that a little bit more. Then some changes in the coding tips that I think are going to be some challenging for some of us to just be able to really go back and look at all this. The first one, they just clarified the Kennedy terminal ulcers. So skin changes at the end of life, or otherwise known as the Kennedy terminal ulcers or skin failure, are not primarily caused by pressure. So if we can get that documentation that that's what the pressure injury is, it's not pressure, then we would not code those in section M. Now, if they're having a treatment and we're putting some kind of lotion or dressing on it, then yes, we would code those in section M. But the ulcer itself would not be coded. For each pressure ulcer, we're going to determine the deepest anatomical stage. At admission, we're going to code based on findings from the first skin assessment that is conducted on or after, or as close as to the admission as possible. So this was put in there because a lot of times if facilities have actual wound nurses, or they have a wound care team that comes into the facility to do assessments of the skin conditions, and maybe our nurses on admission, they're just coding what they see. They're not classifying it, they're not staging it, they're not determining the cause. They're just saying how much skin tissue is involved and what does it measure, what does it look like. This is kind of getting us the clarification that we needed, that said, okay, as soon as possible, when we have that official skin assessment and we're calling it something, we can still say that that area was present on admission. We're still not going to reverse or backstage, and we have to consider all of the historical levels of the tissue involvement. They also clarified that a previously closed pressure ulcer that opens again should be reported at its worst stage unless it's currently presenting at a higher stage or unstageable. So if we had a stage 2 that closed and now it reopened, it's still going to be a stage 2. The part that we really want to look at, and that's new, and they've given a lot of examples in the REI manual, is if a resident has a pressure ulcer injury that was documented on admission, then closes and reopens at the same stage, we can code that as pressure ulcer injury as present on admission. So it was present on admission, a stage 2, it closes, 9 months later, it reopens at the same spot. As long as it's a stage 2 or lower, or reopens at the same stage, a stage 2, we can code that as present on admission. Now, there's still some clarification, I think the last I heard, that's coming out on this. If that stage 2 goes to a stage 3, then we would code a stage 3, and it's no longer going to be considered present on admission, because now it's at a higher stage than what it was originally when it was present on admission. So I do believe the last I heard, there is still some clarifications coming out with all of that. So open it up for questions. The last slide, when you get the slides, are again just the links to the REI manual, the draft REI manual, because it's not been finalized yet, but the MDS forms have been finalized. So you can click on that, and the YouTube channel.
So thank you
thanks,
so
Casey.
much, Deb. We're going to begin the Q&A portion here in a moment. If you have a question or comment, please submit it using the chat or the Q&A tool in your Zoom menu. You can also raise your hand and ask to be unmuted to ask your question aloud. I'd like to invite everyone to next week's webinar, where we will discuss the changes of the MDS in sections N, O, P, and Q that will be next Wednesday at 2 p.m. and I'll drop a link to that in the chat soon here. We also invite you to bring your questions to our virtual live chat every Tuesday and Thursday at noon. Deborah Wright will be there to answer your questions on topics such as quality improvement initiatives, infection control, or MDS coding. You can find the links to those live chats in our webinars in the newsletter we send out each Friday called the Last Minute Lowdown. If you would like to receive that letter but don't and you're not sure if you're on the mailing list or not, please email me at kstevens@qualityinsights.org and I'll get you on the list. All right, let's see if there's any questions.
And while you're looking at that, the one thing I didn't say in the beginning, Casey, was know that, I mean, we went through, these were some pretty big sections of the MDS, and the REI Manual has pages upon pages of guidance. These webinars are strictly to make you aware of the changes, not to go through the entire section. So it's just the changes that we'll see once October 1st hits, so that you can start looking at your processes and policies and procedures and training the staff that do those sections.
All right, no questions at the moment. Oh, there we go. Can you put the link to the CMS YouTube? Deb, do you care to show that resources slide one more time?
Now, where'd it go? There it is. These will also be in the slides when you get the slides either later today or this week. So you'll have those.
All right, any other questions for us today? All righty, before we sign off, we'd like to ask everyone, if you've got time, to please complete a short evaluation of today's webinar. It is anonymous and will show as a pop-up as soon as the webinar ends. You have a couple minutes to fill that out. We greatly appreciate it. Deb, thank you so much for joining us today. And all of you, thank you for joining us. We hope you can join us again next week. Have a great day.
Thank you.